Okay, we're going to get kick-started tonight, and thanks everyone for logging in to the next of our county leadership series. This webinar series is specific for county officers, members of county executive and committees, etc. So I know we have a series of workshops or webinars also taking place for club officers, but this one is very much specific for county officers, so we're looking forward to it. Tonight I'm joined, my name's Lynn Savage, National Development Manager with Ladies Football, and tonight I'm joined by our Operations and Planning Manager, which is Paula Prunty. So Paula will be coming in throughout the evening and interacting with you as we go along. So as you'll see on the screen, feel free to type any questions in the Q&A. Also, we might pose a few questions, which you can type in the chat. So we'll try and keep it as interactive as possible for you to keep you engaged with us as we go along. If you can't hear at any stage, just feel free to exit the webinar and you can join back in. So tonight's topic is volunteer management, and we're delighted that we're really motoring through the county leadership series with a lot of great webinars due to come up in the coming weeks also. But tonight's very much focusing on volunteers and managing them within your county at county level. So we look at the volunteer. So actually, what is the volunteer before we try and manage them? What's the stages of volunteer management? And then what's next for you as a county? So when you're finished the webinar and you're sitting with your county executive, for most of us it's online meetings at the minute, obviously with no face-to-face, but what can we put in place as a county following maybe the webinar tonight? So just to start, a few stats for you there on the screen. 28.4% of adults in the Republic of Ireland volunteer. So for that context, that's over a quarter of the population. That's a huge amount of volunteers. In the north of Ireland, over 37,000 people are involved in volunteering. So again, massive numbers of people volunteering in sport. So one volunteer in sport creates well-being worth 18,000 euro for themselves and for those they help play the sport. So the volunteers are real hidden diamonds. And we're also very conscious tonight that everyone on this is a volunteer also. So although you're looking at volunteer management, you're also looking at volunteer management for yourself and for the volunteers that you potentially would be managing. So for LGFA, we conducted a volunteer impact survey in 2018. So at that stage, there was over 180,000 members, which has grown since then. But some of the key findings of this, there was 91% of respondents said they would recommend volunteering with LGFA. This was independently conducted with Volunteer Ireland. So that was a phenomenal finding for ourselves, meaning people were enjoying their experience of volunteering, which I suppose that's what we want you to keep in mind as we go through the evening. Over 50% of respondents were long-term volunteers. So that was also a key thing, that people were staying in their roles or maybe moving from role to role, but staying as a volunteer. And the biggest drawback to volunteering was time and cost of volunteering. So they were the biggest drawbacks of actually getting involved. So we're going to get you interactive straight away, but I just want you to type in the chat there and Paul will feed back a few of them. What are some of the volunteer roles in your county? And as you said, tonight's webinar is very much aimed at county officers, county executives rather than club level. So thinking county level, what are some of the volunteer roles in your county? And Paul will feed back a few of those. You can just use the chat.
We're all very shy at the minute. Oh, here we go.
Give it a minute.
The role of a PRO.
Yeah, it's a PRO.
To raise funds, social media team is run by volunteers.
Brilliant. So fundraising committees, yeah, or work groups, social media, said the PROs.
Coaches, development, PRO, fundraisers.
Excellent. So your coaches who take your teams at county level are obviously volunteers also. So a lot of different roles there in relation to it, and many of these are on the screen also. All of your roles as executive officers are volunteer roles. Subcommittees or work groups, county mentors, as was mentioned in that as well, gates people, and loads more. They're just some of the examples. So to get a fully functional county, there's a lot of volunteers involved to make this happen. So if that's the case, how do we make sure we hold on to them and we manage them properly, that they want to stay volunteering with us and with your county? So just to set the scene, what is volunteering? I'm not going to read these in full because they're up on the screen for you. But the key line there being, it's the commitment of time and energy for the benefit of society and community. So it's taken freely and by choice. So commitment of time and energy. And I'm sure everyone on the call is going, well, even tonight, you're given time in relation to your volunteer role. So commitment of time and energy, but it is benefiting other people. What is a volunteer? Again, someone who from the community who contributes to the development of the community. So even you logged on tonight, you're hopefully going to pick up a few tips that will benefit your county. So you're doing it, you're not sitting at home, which is the benefit, instead of sitting maybe in some cold rooms around the place, sitting at home, finding out tips that will help your county. So you're trying to do it for other people. Who can volunteer? Anybody. And that's a key thing. Anybody can volunteer. But we'll talk later on about matching people to the right roles. But just because somebody volunteers for something that you don't feel is for them doesn't mean there's not a place for them. So sometimes we need to think outside the box in relation to our volunteers, and we'll address that later on also. And the final one, what's the importance of volunteers? Well, you've seen from a few slides ago the value on volunteering and what it brings to society. So they are vital to the organisation and management of every county, as I said, including yourselves. And without volunteers, simply there would be no activity and the counties would cease to exist. So they're extremely valuable, and all volunteers deserve praise, thanks and recognition. At this point, I know we want to thank yourselves for the time that you're putting into your roles as well, but we'll cover a lot of this as we go through it. So thinking of where we are now, and we're saying that it's really important that we're valuing our volunteers. So before we get into the nitty gritty of actual management and giving you tips on managing your volunteers, how does your county currently support its volunteers? So if you want to type in the chat there again, if there's anything specifically, and it might be that you don't do it or maybe another member of your executive does it, what are things you do to currently support members of your county volunteers? And Paula will jump in on these again from the chat. Hopefully, Paula will see a few ideas coming through before we give them away.
Yeah, no, you have them warmed up now, Lynn, so they're going to be flying in with them. I do think it was interesting that it took them a long time to actually acknowledge their own executive roles as volunteers on the county board, probably because it feels like a full-time job that they don't feel like volunteers. But yeah, so stuff that's coming in here now is recognition when you do a good job. Yeah,
and that recognition, we'll be talking about all the different ways of recognising it, but you know yourself, there's nothing worse if you spent ages doing something and you feel as if nobody's even noticed. So recognition is really important.
Somebody else has said getting a good PRO is vital. A lot of work involved for one person, looking to split into social media, press and radio, and then club to county PRO, so that no one has too much to do on their own. So obviously delegating out the role and splitting the workload is a good way to...
Yeah, splitting and getting more people to help that person. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Any more there, Paula?
Some have said to help promote club activities.
Yes,
by recognising their efforts and their commitments.
Excellent. So we're going to talk about some of those ways of actually recognising the volunteers, and that's important. And even as I said, I know you're probably sitting yourself going, well, I'm a volunteer also, and what's it to do to recognise me? And yes, but maybe it takes the I suppose creating this climate around your own volunteers that, okay, this is how we're going to do this, how we're going to support each other, we're going to thank each other, and just think a little bit differently, that people really want to be part of it.
Sorry, Lynn, just one excellent one that come in there is about providing access to training.
Excellent, yeah. So making sure that there's training there, that the volunteer feels that they're supported in that way. And this kind of leads nicely, Paula, into the next one, which is what is volunteer management, which is what tonight's about. And volunteer management refers to the process of creating systems for recruitment. So how you actually get the volunteers, then how you train them, which you mentioned, how you engage with them, and then the coordination of them. Because there's nothing worse where volunteers are there and they feel either one, they've been given nothing to do, or two, they've been given far too much and feeling no support. And the leaky bucket that's underneath is known as the leaky bucket syndrome, where we keep losing people. And a lot of these people are really good people. So I suppose what we're trying to do tonight is to fix the holes in the buckets around the country, to try and make sure that we aren't leaking some really, really good volunteers. And if we can create that environment that wants them to stay and feel that they're thriving, well, then we'll have less water being leaked from the bucket. And I think that's really, really important. So why do volunteers get involved? And this is like good to know, because even for yourself, maybe think and reflect and say, well, why am I in the role? And for some people, you could be sitting saying, I was roped into it, I was put into it unknown to myself, but hopefully some of these will resonate with you. Personally asked is a big, big one. So a lot of volunteers who get involved have been asked. Somebody has physically came to them, whether it's meeting them, it's a phone call, but they were personally asked to do something. And that's really, really important. Affiliation with the organisation, so they feel part of ladies football. So they want to get involved. They want to get involved at a different level. A personal connection. So again, it was for the love of what you're involved in the game. Maybe there's a history of family members being involved in it. So something personal in relation to it. Enjoying the type of work. So I'll take the example of the PRO and the comment that was done there with Paul is on social media. So maybe I just love social media. I'm never off Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And now I get the opportunity to actually promote my county on it. So maybe you really enjoy the type of work is why you're involved in it. You want to learn new skills, which that training comes into, and you want to meet new people. And that becomes a community in relation to your county executive as well, and getting to meet those new people. On the opposite side, why do volunteers leave? So this was the feedback from the volunteers who were actually leaving. Failure to recognise input. So that we talked about recognition a minute ago. So failure to recognise it. Not measuring their value. So maybe they were left sitting in the corner as if every time they go to speak, they were shut down. So not measuring their value. Not matching the skills to the opportunities. So the fundraising was mentioned there earlier. Maybe I know literally every business person around the county, but I've been stuck doing a different job that I've absolutely no skill set for, and I'm only dying to get involved in the fundraising committee. So making sure that you're matching the skills to the opportunities is really important, and I won't want to leave then because I have an interest in it. Failure to train or invest in them. So I've been asked to do a role, I've said I can't do it because I'm not sure how to do X, Y, or Z, but it just keeps being ignored rather than giving me the training to do it. And hopefully all the upcoming webinars for specific officers will really help that in relation to your own county. The lack of strong leadership. So maybe it feels that there is no leadership from the top. It's a bit all over the place. Lack of control or delegation. So in Paula's point where maybe there's not enough help being given, or on the opposite side where I feel I'm being given nothing to do. Time, and let's face it, everyone's lives change. Look at the last year. It's a prime example where maybe somebody was so into the role and then all of a sudden just had to take a step back. And that's fine. It's a volunteer role, so time can be there. Uncertain of the role. I signed up to do X, but I'm now being asked to do Z, which is absolutely nothing to do with what I thought I was signing up for. So having clear role descriptions, which we mentioned, are another reason why volunteers leave, and loads of other reasons, but they're some of the key ones that come across in findings. So to help you out, we're going to talk briefly just on the 4 steps in relation to volunteer management. And these are pre-recruitment, recruitment, recognition, and retention. So they're the 4 steps we're going to focus on. The first one is pre-recruitment. So before you even get a volunteer, this is where you are, and maybe it's now at the start of the year, where you still know you have a few gaps of people you need to fill. You're not sure what they are. That's what pre-recruitment is. So the first thing you're going to have to do is identify the gaps. So for instance, if you're missing a development officer on your executive, there is no point in going away looking for somebody who has not got the skill set of a development officer, because that's not going to fill the gap. So you need to identify what the gaps are. As I said, if it's a fundraising committee, it's a fixtures committee, it's gates people. Okay, so whatever it is, you have to identify the gap. So at least you're going to be able to go after the right people to try and fill that gap. So in your own time, and not tonight and not in the chat, the first thing we'd be asking you to do is that you write down the names of all the personnel who've committed to the various roles, both admin and coaching for the current year, and look as an executive okay, where are the gaps? Because that's the first thing you need to look at. And then maybe your county are well ahead in all this, and you might have a policy on recruitment and retention. So if we're short on volunteers, do we have a policy as to how we go and recruit them? Have we a policy on what we need to do with our volunteers to make sure we hold on to them? If it's not there, well then hopefully maybe by the end of tonight you'll see different bits and pieces that will help you devise that. But the number one step is, where are the gaps? Because you have to see where they are before we get the people to fill them. Somebody who can help in something like this, and I know some people would be saying it's hard enough to get the people we have, but if possible, a volunteer coordinator can be so beneficial. They literally just look at the work of the various volunteers involved on your county executive, subcommittees, as said, gates people, the running of your county. They're not necessarily a member of the executive. It can be somebody that you feel would fit this role. But they would really be looking after the volunteers in relation to recruiting, retaining, rewarding. And I'm not saying they'll be going away and assigning all the volunteers. Obviously, that's the full executive. But just somebody who's really looking after them and making sure that they're listened to, that they're engaged with, that they feel part of it. Their main roles would include assessing the need in the county for positions and events. So like we mentioned, identifying the gaps. Maybe you're looking at your county finals. Hopefully when restrictions decide to go away and COVID leaves us, we'll have all our activities back up and running. And there may be a big event coming up. And this person can actually say, well, we need people for X, Y, or Z. So they're identifying those gaps, getting to know all the county volunteers and potential volunteers. So that real point of contact, the face that engages with them. Making sure all the jobs have a role outline. So that clear role description, because if people are leaving because they don't have a role description, well, then it's important that we have one. And then they're the ones who would engage with volunteers to see, okay, is there any training that would help you? If they come back, if Paula came back and said, do you know what, I'm really struggling writing minutes for meetings, well, then this person could actually go and look and see, is there anywhere that they can engage with somebody to get help for the secretary, for instance, who wants further work in relation to minutes and meetings. So trying to get those training opportunities, and we'll give an example of a plan coming up in a few slides and how you can actually help that one out. The volunteer coordinator, not necessary, but can be hugely, hugely beneficial because that's their sole purpose. They have a focus, whereas we all know how busy everybody gets in their volunteer jobs, and it's hard enough to look after yourself, never mind everyone else. So this person kind of fills in that for you and keeps the whole thing gelled together. As we go through the evening, I'm going to mention the volunteer recruitment and retention toolbox that's on our website. Now, a lot of the documents that's in it, you'll see they're worded very much towards the club, but that's not to say they can't be adopted to your county. So I'm only putting it up there just as somewhere you can go after this and have a look at the toolbox, because there's loads of documents there that could actually help you out. And it can be applicable to your county, and you'll see that as we go through it. For the pre-recruitment part, there's loads of documents. So you'll see all the ones listed are things that's up there, including, is your club volunteer friendly? That can be adopted to your county and have a look at, in other words, before we even get a volunteer, are we open to getting them? Do we really want them? We say we want them, but do we? Are we going to give them jobs if we take them? The role of the coordinators there, the importance of effective leadership. So loads of things that will actually help you out under the pre-recruitment section of the website. In the recruitment part, which is step 2, which is when you're actually going to get them, we'll mention it and we'll mention it again, but the matching of the roles is so important. Getting the right people for the right role. And I've said this in many places, you're actually better with a role being empty rather than putting a name in there who's not going to be active, because they're doing the same amount of work and getting credit for it. You wait and bide your time until you get the right person to fill that role, and then it becomes active for you. So just in the chat again, very quickly, just going to get you to type a few of the qualities that you feel a chairperson would need. So Paul is going to kick back into action on this one. A few of the qualities you think a chairperson would need.
Okay, things have come in like good leadership, Lynn.
Excellent. So leadership. So they're steering the ship.
Organised, fair, and communication.
Brilliant. So leadership, organised, fair, communication. So a lot of really strong qualities that you want your chairperson to have.
Yeah, and actually that was even a case or call I was dealing with today, and really the crux at the bottom of it came down to, was the person being fair to both sides of the story? And it was very hard to, I suppose, get to the bottom of who was right and who was wrong. But I suppose the person I was dealing with, they'd approached it from a level of fairness. And being honest, it worked out good with the two people that they were dealing with, because that was the approach, and it was very obvious that was the approach they had taken. Other things must be neutral at all times, which is very important. Yeah. Ability to listen to everyone's point of view and sometimes be able to make an, I think, unpopular decision, I'd say is what they mean there, for the better good. Knowledge of all different aspects, and a good knowledge, and I presume that means a good knowledge even of the rules and workings of the association, I'm sure.
Very good. And that was an important point you had as well. Like, not all leaders are the most popular people, but they can be respected. So, okay, they made maybe an unpopular decision, but it was for the right reasons, so they're respected, which is a lot different. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing, except this time, if you were looking for a fundraising committee member, what's some of the qualities you think they'd need to have? So again, we'll just fire them into the chat again. And I think every candidate said they'd love to have a few fundraising committee members, so hopefully we get a few. So Paul, I don't know if there's anything coming in there.
I think somebody has put up good listener and honesty, but I think that was with the chairperson. So the fundraising, then somebody has put a good manner with people and be able to talk well. Yeah, you need to be able to sell it to people. Honest, hardworking, and reliable.
Very good.
I think it's a word you often get associated with money, is reliable, isn't it?
It is, yeah. You want to be able to trust them.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody has put anything else. Oh, delegate helpers. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so to get more people involved.
Must be a bit more involved, yeah.
And I'm going to throw up one last one for everybody, which is an under 16 county mentor. So you're looking for a county manager for your under 16 team. What's the qualities that you're going to need for this person? So again, just throw them into the chat there. This is the last one. So 3 very different volunteers listed at the minute.
Yeah, no one else. And they're not coming forward anything with your under 16 mentor yet.
Don't be shy. We know you all need them.
Ability and skills for the job.
Yeah. So having the ability, the skills. So that's what I suppose we want to line out what some of those skills are. Which one would you take on first, Paula?
Ooh, I don't know, Lynn. That's a good question. Maybe chairperson, like a delegate to everybody. Is that fair enough? They've said surrounded by a good background team. And being honest, that could be applied to everybody, because a chairperson needs a good background team too. To remember they are only children, I suppose, is a very
perfect. So
as well.
I suppose the reasons that we put this up is, and we do know that some of these roles involve nominations or applications, not necessarily just going and headhunting somebody, but for some of them, it is headhunting them. But the reason we're putting it up there is, we asked you for the qualities of these people, and if you look at what we read out, there was very little similar, because the volunteers are very different. So that's where it's so important to identify the gap. Okay, the gap is the fundraising committee member. Now we need to go after somebody with those qualities, because if they don't have those qualities, they're not going to fulfill the role of the member that we want. So it is so important that we look for the volunteer to fill the role that we want them to do. And also what it highlights is, sometimes you look and say, oh, we can't get any volunteers. We're doing everything. And yet in some cases, it can be very hard to get the volunteers. But in others, have you asked? Did they come on board and you give them nothing to do? Do you feel when they do it, I should do it better myself? Okay, and yes, in other cases we said it's just difficult to get them. But by looking at that, it also shows that just because you're the chairperson doesn't mean you should also be the under 16 county mentor, because there's very different qualities required for both roles. So that's what we really want to highlight. So make sure you match the qualities to the volunteer you're going to do, because you will also keep them quicker if they feel they're in the right role. So again, not needing in the chat, literally just for you to think, do your qualities match any of those roles? Or if you think of the role that you're in, do you think your qualities match it? Or maybe is there gaps in your county already? And can you recognize the qualities in somebody else to fill those gaps? And that's why when you're asking somebody and you're actually listening, Paula, the reason I think you would be a brilliant chairperson is you're excellent in running meetings, and you can actually go through all the qualities as the reasons why you feel that person should do it. And it'll just strengthen their confidence and hopefully make them want to say yes in relation to it. So you've got to question, is the person the right fit? So you need the right person in the right role with the right support around them. And that is what volunteer management is. Getting the right people in the right role with the right support. And I will stress it again, if it means waiting off till another meeting until you get the right person, rather than putting the wrong piece of the jigsaw in, because you will just be going backwards and backwards and backwards trying to fit it. Whereas if you can get the right piece, you're on to a winner straight away. So when you're recruiting these people, these are a few of the little things you need to keep in mind. As we said, personal asks are number one. People getting that ask is huge. And I know even from experience myself, there's a few things that you've ended up doing or being involved in where if somebody had to send me an email or like randomly, I probably would never have responded. But when you're actually asked and the reasons why you should be in it, well, then it's very hard for you to say no. Supplement personal asks with online or email. So if you find that you still need more people, for instance, maybe there's something you need to put out there and the type of volunteers you're needing, why you're needing them, how long it's for, etc. Be very specific. So potential volunteers, they respond better to being asked to do a specific task at a specific time for a specific purpose, rather than a general, can you volunteer? So if I know that I've been asked to do the fundraising committee and it's going to be a 2-month project, we're going to meet once a week and there's going to be 5 of us involved in it. The amount we need to raise is X. Well, that's extremely clear versus, will you come on the fundraising committee for our county for the year? Now, what does that mean? What does it look like? What am I going to have to commit to? How much are we going to have to raise? Is it going to be just my responsibility? So the more specific you can be, the better for the volunteer. If you are going to have that conversation, it's no harm having it as a role play yourself first, having a script and practice it, but then it sounds authentic. Because if there's key messaging you want to get across to the person, you don't want to be going into the car afterwards or hanging up the phone and saying, oh, forgot to say that. And that's what would have nailed it. Thank them right away. So even if Paula turns around and says, do you know what, thank you so much for your phone call, I just can't do it this year, I would still say, thank you so much for taking the call. Because maybe things just weren't right for Paula at the minute to be able to give the time to it. But by the end of the year, she still has that relationship with you, and she might actually pick up the phone and say, do you know what, my time's a bit better now, so I can help out. Or if I pick up the phone again to Paula, she'll definitely pick it up again. So that gratitude is really important. And ensure if they do say yes, that they understand what they need to do. And that's where the match in the roles come in. So those clear role descriptions. For any of the executive officers, there's a full booklet on our website in relation to role descriptions of each, and I would recommend at the start of the year everybody reads them. I said we have upcoming webinars in relation to specific roles. So important to get your officers to sign up to them so that it's really clear from the start. Identify the person with the qualities required and give them clarity around what they're going to be doing. And then if there is subcommittees needed, so as was mentioned earlier through the chat, feeling there was too much to do, that if there was additional people to help out, then match those correct people as well. So there's no point if the PRO is really struggling, an excellent writer, can write every report to the newspaper, but hasn't a clue how to use Twitter or Facebook. Well, there's no point in putting somebody on his working group or subcommittee who also can't do it. So making sure that you're matching the correct people, as I said, like a local business person, maybe for a fundraising committee. So matching your roles, you're more likely to keep the people and it will be more effective. So some of the questions just to ask yourself as well, and I know we're going to pose a few of these questions, but these are just ones to take with you. They're not ones to throw up in the chat. But if you could have an induction pack to a new volunteer in your county, what would it include? So think about this. It's the start of the year. Maybe many of your counties have new volunteers. And they could be sitting, maybe some people on the call tonight, going, I actually have no idea where to start. I don't know what the previous is. I don't know what the structures are. If there was actually a little induction pack to give to that new volunteer in relation to your county, could just be a few pages. And we've done this with a lot of clubs and they found it really beneficial. What would it include? And the reason I'm not asking you to put it in the chat is that's different for every county. But just think about it. Isn't it also lovely to get and maybe signed by the chairperson to welcome them on board? So something like that, what would it actually include? We keep mentioning that engaging with volunteers is essential. So there's no point in Paula saying to me, I'll help you with the fundraising committee. Of course I will. And I'm like, great. Come back to me when you've raised that 10,000, Paula, and I don't engage with her from here till she's raised it. So how do we make sure that that engagement happens at all time? So how can you improve this in your county to entice volunteers to become involved? The personal ask is really important to get a volunteer, but what's really important for other volunteers is word of mouth. So if that volunteer is really enjoying their role and they're talking to another potential volunteer about how much they're enjoying it, well, there's a good chance you're going to get that person maybe involved as well, versus the volunteer absolutely slating you every time they meet these people because they feel they've been worked to the bone, they don't hear from you, etc. So the engagement is really important. So there are two real questions just to ask yourselves as a county executive. Again, on the website, a huge amount of resources there in relation to recruitment, and you can see even engaging with all the different types of volunteers. There's documents on every single one of them, and even the importance of asking is there on it. So they should really help you. And as I said, the job descriptions are also available in the County Officer Guide, which we'll show you at the end. Step 3 then. So we're nearly there. We're only 2 steps away to having our full volunteer management programme. Recognition. It's the end of your county season. I'm going to ask you to put a few things in the chat here again. And I know we're at the start of the season, but we're going to pretend we're at the end because we're not going to be sitting back here doing volunteer management again. It's the end of your county season. What will your county do in the coming weeks to recognise the contribution of all current volunteers that give their free time throughout the year? So you're thinking, it's the end of the year, what could we do as a county executive, both for yourselves and for all the volunteers who help the county level during the year? Maybe some of it you've done already. Maybe there's a few ideas there of what you could do. So Paul, I'm not sure if there's anything cropping up there yet in the chat, and don't be shy. People throw it in the chat. Sharing is caring.
Not if you want me to raise that 30,000, Lynn. Is that what you said you wanted?
Yeah, I'm going to see how long it takes you to.
Yeah, no, I won't be doing that. No, nobody just.
And you might have a few things on this too, Paula, because I know.
Yeah, Mary has helped me. She said ensuring that they get personally thanked at
Brilliant.
the AGM. Yeah, and I think we can never underestimate how valuable the word thank you is, and somebody actually saying thank you for their time, their commitment and the work they've done. It goes such a long way. Like,
it's huge. And as you said, whether that be in a meeting, face to face, even sometimes a letter from the chairperson to on head of paper, something that people can keep, is massive.
Yeah, recognition post to volunteers on social media.
Yeah, so actually putting them out there so people can see that they've worked tirelessly. And I have to say, some of the nominations we get for the volunteers, like the stories, you're like, how did we not hear about this?
Exactly, yeah. And I know, like, as the association, we would take, I suppose, advantage of days like the National Volunteer Day to recognise all our volunteers. But there's nothing stopping a county or to have their own volunteer day or week or initiative like that to recognise all the volunteers in their county. Recognition, so they've done via social media. I think recognition to all they've done through social media. So obviously the power of social media, the ability to recognize people in, I suppose we use that as well, the ability to tell stories. And as you said, there's a lot of volunteers come through the volunteer awards, but there are many volunteers within their county who they could profile and do a piece on social media, be it monthly, be it every 6 months even. It's a good way to profile their volunteers.
Exactly, and a lot of the times we write articles or we as you say, profile people, and a lot of the times it's players, and that's so important. But also there's loads of other members, whether it's match officials or, as you say, volunteers, and how we can mix all that up. So some great ideas there in relation to it, but there's no point in us talking about it. These are things that will really help, because that volunteer who maybe was quavering, going, not so sure if I'm going to commit again next year, you can guarantee they will be buzzing. Absolutely buzzing and dying to get back involved with you again next year. So that volunteer appreciation plan is very important for your county. So while the volunteers and the roles, they can be extremely varied, there is 3 areas, I suppose, that can help appreciate and support your volunteers. And that's recognising them, which has been mentioned, resourcing them, and then respecting them. So what do we mean by the 3 of those? So by recognising them, and this was mentioned, that we have a county policy that all volunteers are recognised at the end of the year for their efforts. And when you think about that, if you have this volunteer coordinator, they've nearly kept a log of people who volunteered for you. So for instance, somebody who done a gate in the back of beyond for you on a freezing cold day, like, you don't want them to be left out of the thank yous. So they'll do it again for you if they got the thank you. So that's part of the policy. I said it might be in a letter or it could be in a meeting, which was mentioned previously. Maybe you have a thank you night, an appreciation night, and even it could be your last meeting of the year that you don't normally have a cup of tea and a biscuit, and all of a sudden you do, so people can actually chat. We all can't wait to get back into meeting rooms instead of we'll sit on Teams for an extra hour and have our cup of tea and a chat. Although Paula would admit we enjoy our morning teas on a Monday morning, where as a staff we all get together for 15 minutes too. But those little things are so important about feeling part of something bigger than yourself. And nominate volunteers for awards. And it doesn't even have to just be the LGFA awards. There's national volunteer awards with the Federation of Ireland. There's loads of different ones. And so often when we put out the winners of the volunteer awards are, and you hear, well, how did so-and-so not win an award? Because they weren't nominated. So it's so important that they're not, every winner is nominated. So if there is somebody in your county, recognise them, put them up there for award, really important. Resource them. So the simple thing, maybe you're after getting a new sponsor and you've signed a deal with a certain licensee, and the chairperson lands with this gorgeous new jacket, but nobody else does. Okay, so is there something that you can sign up for people to do it? It could be something as simple. I remember being involved in my own club many years ago where we got little cheap polo shirts, but we were doing development, just a fun thing with kids at the time, who many of those players have now retired, which isn't saying how long ago that is that we set it up. But they all got the same t-shirt, so they all felt the same, so they felt part of something bigger. The training, which Paula mentioned, so that's resourcing them. Is there something they need to be helped with, upskilled? And it might not be attending training, it could even be directing them to somewhere there is resources that would help them. Is there equipment readily available? So you've signed me up as the under-16 manager, but told me I don't even have a football. Okay, so what do I need to make me be able to do my role? That's how you're going to resource somebody, which is really important. And then respect them. You want to ease the administration load for volunteers. So if you're respecting them, they won't feel like they have to be doing the role 24/7. Workload divided into small lots. So Paula mentioned at the very start, maybe help. Okay, so the PRO role has got so big, and one of the attendees here tonight said that you want to divide it into different people. So that's actually showing respect to that volunteer. We know what we've asked you to do is massive, and out of respect, we're going to get people to help you. That's a positive thing. The roles and responsibilities, we said, are clearly defined, and they're allowed to do them. So you're not asking me to be the PRO, but some other officer constantly is putting everything on the website and putting it on social media before I even get near it. That there's a volunteer succession plan in place. So I've told you 10 times over, I'm definitely not going forward at the AGM this year. But in the background, you're like, oh, I know they will, but that person is definitely not. So having that respect to say, okay, do you know what, you did give X amount of years, maybe you could help me try and identify somebody and they could work along with you for this year. And again, that's showing respect. And that there is a formal support plan in place. Again, that volunteer coordinator could be so important in relation to that succession planning. On the website, under the toolbox, there's areas of this involved in it as well, helping you out with your appreciation plan, things you can do with your volunteers. And there's even samples, certificates of recognition. So even something like that given to all your volunteers. And you might think, well, sure, nobody wants a certificate. It's amazing what people love to have. And the final step is the retention step. So the new season will be coming upon us in coming weeks, and it is for many of us. We just don't know when it's going to be lifted, but it's coming upon us. What do you need to do now to ensure you keep your current volunteer base motivated for the year ahead? So just throw in the chat there if you can, just one or two things. What could you do to keep your current volunteer base motivated for the year ahead? And Paula, I'm sure you'll agree, at times like this is probably more important than ever, because I know even myself at Christmas, the thoughts of coming into another year of restrictions and are we still going to have X, Y, and Z and so many minutes in dress rooms and everything else. So it's probably more important than ever to be able to motivate volunteers.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, like the year that is, and a lot of people have reacted very differently to COVID and how they felt about it. And I suppose even your current people, are they comfortable with staying involved? And I know, Lynn, like, and you can probably obviously vouch for this, like during the whole of COVID, we would have, as staff, received calls from Helen as our CEO and from Marie as our president to check in and to say hi and to see how we were getting on. Not all about work, but it was about their care for our, I suppose, mental well-being and how in general we were doing. And that meant an awful lot to us. So I suppose that check-in with your volunteers, be it your chairperson does it or somebody does it, to see how everyone on the board is doing, and I suppose maybe how they're feeling about the year ahead, and they can address any concerns at a meeting, so that everyone's comfortable and you're fully aware of everyone's, I suppose, what would you say, their circumstances as well, because maybe not everyone is in that position. Somebody else has said to ensure you communicate with them in relation to webinars that they know is going on, they're not forgotten, and that's really important. There's so much free training available, but there's no point expecting your PRO to go on it if you haven't informed them that they're going on it. What else has people said? To encourage volunteers to try new roles, to keep them interested, energized, find out what they might be interested in trying next. And I think, Lynn, it's really important you touched on that. Where are their interests? What would they like to do? Because they're more inclined to stay involved if it is within their area of interest that they like doing.
And that's massive, Paula, because you know yourself, how often do you hear where somebody nearly felt stale in the role, they lost their motivation, and next thing they're buzzing because they've just been given something that they really can get their teeth stuck into, that they have an area of interest. But how many times do we actually ask our volunteers what is their area of interest?
Yeah. Somebody else has also said about don't burden the volunteer with too much work, share the workload. And I always think that delegation, there's a fine line in delegation and somebody feeling you don't think they're capable for the job either, or maybe you take away some part of the job that they actually liked. So I think when you are sharing the workload, that is a very clear, and I think we've talked about communication tonight as well, about what the workload is, why you're sharing it, and who's going to do what. And I suppose recognizing that the volunteer does need help, and that's, again, sometimes, Lynn and God, we're all guilty of it, too proud to ask for help. So it's finding that fine line between, as I said, not upsetting somebody that they think they can't do their job either, but absolutely delegation is key.
And I think you hit an important thing there, Paul, as well. Like, and a volunteer is astute as well, so they'll also be very open to seeing, okay, well, actually everything I'm being given is stuff that nobody else wants to do.
Exactly.
So there's the other line of it, of taking stuff that they want to do versus dumping them with everything that you wouldn't. And it's one line I always use myself, is don't ask people to do stuff you wouldn't do yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important. It's not to say you have to go and do it all yourself, but if it's something that is that bad, why are you forcing other people to do it?
Yeah.
So that's really important too.
Yeah. And then I think, Lynn, one thing that I always find very effective and beneficial is, what's the project? Like, what are you asking as the county board? What are you going to do? What are you going to get involved in? And it's amazing that that really motivates people, because everyone then has a role in the project and everyone's looking forward to seeing the project through, and the good feeling that you get when you see the actual project happening. So I think you can motivate people by putting a simple plan in place, even as you say, because we can't plan too far ahead, but planning for the next month or the month after. What's our plan, and seeing that through. That really motivates people.
And actually, I think people would admit, especially at county level, I don't know when we've ever had this downtime. So there's actually, I've been talking to, I don't know how many county boards this week that are saying they're actually enjoying the bit of downtime to be able to have the time to put structures in place and set up those projects, which they normally have time to do. So instead of all being in isolation, they are jumping on Teams meetings and stuff, but having discussions that they wouldn't normally have time to do. And that alone can keep people motivated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. As you say, it's a perfect opportunity to identify some of those key things you'd have always wanted to do as a county, and maybe put the plan in place to get them. Or, as you say, Lynn, identify key people within the county who can assist them to help those plans happen.
Yeah, so plenty happened there, but I suppose the next slide just shows you a sample of that training and development template that we mentioned. So whether it be a volunteer coordinator that you have, or a member of the executive, 100%, whoever you think it is, but actually asking the volunteers, like, is there areas that you feel you need help? Some people would be like, no, I could do this role in my sleep at this stage. Maybe I could actually mentor somebody who is struggling with this area. So that alone can motivate me now, thinking, okay, I didn't need the training, but I'm actually buddying with somebody, so that's a bit of motivation as well. So it can work in two avenues. But how can it be achieved? So how are we actually going to do about it? Because there's also no point in me asking Paula, what area do you require development? And then she never hears from me again, because that's nearly worse. So how can it be achieved, and when are we going to do it by? So we have all this. So that can really motivate volunteers, because, as I said, they're given their own time, so they obviously have an interest in it. But if this makes them become even more interested, well, that's brilliant. So that's just a sample one. And again, all of these are on the website for anyone that needs them. So volunteers, they deserve no less than the county's best efforts, and this includes yourself, to ensure that they have a task that is important to the cause, which we've mentioned already, a feeling that their skills and talents are needed, so they're not just there in name and every time they want input, they're put to the sidelines, a sense that they are valued as unique and worthwhile individuals. And the more people you have around that table, the more ideas that you have, and like a little gem of an idea from somebody could make a massive difference. Opportunities to be listened to. So that engagement piece is really, really important. And a strong link to the executive. So as I said, even if I'm the person and I'm doing the gates in the back and beyond, and I meet the chairperson who literally blanks me, yet I was out doing a volunteer role for you a couple of weeks ago. Like, it may not be that I'm sitting on the executive, but I should be recognised as doing something for the county. And that could be just a simple hello, thank you, as we've mentioned before. For that retention plan, looking at your county, how are we going to retain volunteers? So you're at the start of the year now, and maybe some counties still have a few gaps, so that's where you're at. But maybe towards the end of the year, you're looking at, well, how are we going to hold on to the people that we actually have? So you could have a plan, something like this, which, what are you trying to do? So in this case, our senior manager was just unbelievable this year. The players absolutely loved her or him. Look at the amount of extra players we got out playing. So what's our retention strategy? So we need to get a development plan for the manager. We want to show them that we believe in what they've done. By doing a development plan, it's not talking about 1 year, it's looking at the next 2 years or 3 years. What are we going to do? We're going to arrange a meeting with the manager. We're going to talk to them, come up with the goals to make this happen. And then we're going to actually chat to the manager and see, is there any training opportunities they need to actually bring this to fruition? We're going to do it in July. So even though the end of the year is not till, well, we're hoping we don't get knocked out of the championship till the All-Ireland finals, but it's been really good how it's going. We're going to initiate this discussion in July. So there's no opportunity for this manager when we get knocked out of the championship to say, it was great working with X, Y, or Z county, but goodbye. Okay, and then a key, who is actually going to do this? So instead of us all talking about it, who is actually going to do it? So there's a sample, and this could be for all your roles, it could be for committees, it could be for anything, but how are we going to actually retain the people is important in this one. The expectations of the county, and there has to be expectations of what you expect from your volunteers. So you're looking for volunteers who make a serious commitment to carry out the task agreed to. So speaking to volunteers, and I know Paula spoke to some as well, but they're so frustrated where X, Y, or Z is getting so much credit, yet they're a name on a sheet of paper. Okay, so they're making a serious commitment to carry out the task they've agreed to. They're going to operate within the policies and objectives of the county. So on that, maybe we have a county executive meeting, and myself and Paula are thinking very differently, but when we all discuss it as an executive, everyone thinks Paula's suggestion of the way we need to go about it is the best way to do it. So even though I'm like, still don't really agree with it, but okay, we've discussed it, we're now all going to have to go with what Paula said. It's for the best of the county. So we operate within the policies and objectives. We're not showing splits across the thing. So volunteers should be speaking for you and working with you. Operating within the boundaries of their role description. So again, not crossing over. Obviously we can help each other, but not taking over from somebody. Cooperate with other volunteers in the spirit of partnership. So how can we do these things together? Maintain confidentiality, particularly if you're at meetings. There should not be leaks out of those meetings. You are working together. It's a teamwork thing. There's a trust. Undertake training as required. Accept evaluation and supervision to enable you to enhance the performance. I actually think it's a welcome thing, and I know I've taken the example of some referees and things. If I'm at matches, they will straight away come up to you afterwards and look for feedback. Now, I mightn't have been fully concentrating on what they were doing, and I'll tell them that straight up, but they want something to help them make better. So, and that can be from yourselves as well, in actually chatting to each other. How could we do this better? We had a meeting tonight. Paula chaired it, and she asked me, Lynn, how do you think I done chairing that meeting? We do the same with all these webinars. We probably ridicule ourselves to the end after each of them, but that's how we keep making changes for the betterment of the people who are at the other end. And they're committed to the cause because they're given time to it. So they're the expectations of the county. On the other side, what's the expectations of the volunteer? Counties that provide roles that are worthwhile and challenging, okay, so that they feel they're doing it for a reason, with the freedom to use existing skills or develop new ones. They're looking for a positive and successful volunteer experience. And you know yourself from on this, if you were in the role and you really weren't enjoying it, why would you be back? Because it's a volunteer role. Okay, so you have to have a positive, and I'm not saying everything's going to be bells and whistles and we're loving every meeting and everything else. There's going to be a certain amount of it, but that you are enjoying it is the main thing. Those clear role descriptions keep coming up, the adequate training, supervision and support, the opportunities for input into policy and decision-making process. There's no point in me being an executive member, for instance, because that's a volunteer also, but there's meetings going on outside of meetings and decisions being done that we're not part of. So if you're in a position that you're given the opportunity to actually input into what you're supposed to be inputting into. Recognition of volunteers as valued team players. And as I said, it is a team. Even if you're the person who does the church gate collection, we get a day once a year for the whole county. I'm still a volunteer. I've stood outside the church collecting money on behalf of the county. So we're all volunteers, but at different levels. On the website again, the last section of it there is all of those things that you were looking for in helping the database, but how you can actually retain them. So top tips there for retaining them and loads of other information in relation to it. There's also a sample volunteer charter, which can be adopted to your own county in relation to what is expected as volunteers, what you're asking of them, what they should do. And that can be really good to actually get your volunteers to sign up to, but you can adopt it to what you need in your county. The toolbox, as we said, is there. It has everything on it. A lot of the resources that are there literally are in Word documents so that you can change your logo on them to help you out as well. So it was really just to try and show you that there's a lot of stuff there available to download on the website. Also coming up for all our county officers, as I said, we have a series of webinars. So you'll see a long list of them on the left-hand side there. So the next ones that are coming up are specific for chairperson, secretary, treasurer, and PRO. So if you're managing your volunteers, it's so important that you're letting those officers know in your county that these are coming up, and not just letting them know, encourage them to get involved. Because what's really frustrating is normally we've just ran something and 2 days later we get a phone call with a question that was answered at it. So trying to encourage your officers to attend these, especially now when they don't have to travel long distances in relation to it. We'll also have one on teamwork and building networks, so getting you all working together. That culture of continuous improvement, code of rules, conflict resolution. So these are all topics that members of county executives have asked for. We've put them into this whole series, and the one on the 7th of June, which seems a long way off, but we actually have an outside speaker coming in to deliver that, and it's definitely not one to be missed. It's going to be a cracker, but it's all about you and how to look after yourself, because these volunteer roles can be stressful. We're fully aware of that too. On the YouTube channel, the county leadership series is up there, as well as a club leadership series or coach education webinars. They're all up there that you can actually watch back again. The guidelines for club officer booklets are up on our own website. And then the club leadership development program, although it's aimed at clubs, there's still a lot of really good things there. As I said, that minute taken, different things at meetings. So there's little gems of workshops you can actually do online through the GA e-learning platform. So they're just a few things to help you out with that can actually even direct your volunteers to some of these avenues. And that alone is showing them a bit of support as to where they can go and get a bit of help. So to wrap up, some of the questions we want you to ask yourself and to take away with you are, why would volunteers want to stay? So what have you set up in your county that would make your volunteers want to stay? What best practices can we put in place for our volunteers? And even put yourself in the seat. Like, if this was in place in a county, would it make me feel better in my role and want to stay? Could we have that someone responsible for volunteer management, that volunteer coordinator, who actually does make the phone calls and chats to people to see what's their needs? And what would make it easier to volunteer for our county? So what could we actually put in there? What would make it attractive? So listen to all the stuff tonight. Is there any that would really help to get more volunteers in your county? And we'll finish off with this quote. Volunteers are not paid, not because they are worthless, but because they are priceless. And that is for every one of you on this webinar. We mean that. Without volunteers, where would we be? And we really enjoy working with our volunteers, and hence this suite of webinars that we're rolling out as well, because the engagement with volunteers is just brilliant. And I think actually that's one positive thing that's come out of COVID, is the amount of engagement with our volunteers across the country in all aspects has been extremely positive. So that little quote, I think, is something, if we all keep that to heart and we treat them as priceless, we'll keep a hell of a lot more volunteers. So before we wrap up, Paul, I don't know if anyone has any questions, feel free to fire them in the chat, but hopefully we've covered a lot there. So we'll give it a second to see if anything comes through. But Paul, I don't know if you have anything you want to...
No, I think, as you say, those last couple of slides, if they even stay in people's heads, and those few things to look at. And I know, Lynn, you touched on the volunteer officer, or that person or people in your county. And as you said, a lot of people will go, we can't get a PRO and we can't get whoever. But I suppose, as we've always said, if you actually put time into identifying that person who could recruit volunteers for you, it's worth doing that, because then they will recruit. Because maybe it's PRO today, but tomorrow it could be a fundraising committee, then it could be coaches, could be a children's officer, or somebody else like that going forward. So, and as you said, the volunteer officer then looks after the volunteer management, the welfare of all the volunteers, and keeps, I suppose, that volunteer agenda to the fore of everything, because it's a bit like somebody who's always beating the drum. That's their role. And I think you touched on the volunteer charter, which again is a really good way to show volunteers that we value you. And your quote at the end, Lynn, about volunteers being priceless, the charter speaks volumes. It shows you're committed to it. And again, if you've that volunteer officer or volunteer person, they will ensure that charter's implemented across everything that you do and keep it to the fore as well.
Yeah, and I think in many clubs or counties who have put that person in place, Paula, they've kind of put a person who's a people's person, if that makes sense, in that they're not afraid to chat. So I know one club said to me they identified the perfect person, because no matter when they were down in the club or the community or whatever, they'd start a conversation with somebody, but without the person knowing, they knew everything about them before they finished that conversation.
Yes.
So that person was then very easily able to match up. Maybe we didn't realize we had a nurse in the community, and now all of a sudden they're the first aider. So that person can be a people person to really try and match those things is really important.
Absolutely, yeah, that's key, that they are a people's person. And doesn't seem to be any questions coming in, Lynn. You've obviously covered off everything well, so you're getting off light tonight, but
you can save your questions for Paula the next night.
I suppose, as you say, Lynn, we're only ever an email or a phone call away. All the resources Lynn's outlined tonight are on the website. Really good resources. They're all broken down by section, whatever section you need to go to. So we would recommend that you use them, and always provide us with feedback about how beneficial you find them as well. Or if you find something else that you think could be added, by all means let us know, because it's a resource for everyone, and we like to hear of what's practical on the ground and what you find beneficial too.
Brilliant. So that's us for tonight. Short, sweet, on the button of the hour. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We hope every county takes a few tips from it, and thanks to Paula as always for the guidance and advice as we go along there. So thank you everyone. We'll see you soon, and please sign up to the upcoming webinars. They're definitely a brilliant opportunity for your county. So we'll sign off and stay safe.